Perfect. All right. And we are back for another episode of We Good. It's a virtual town hall series focused on COVID-19 and all things Black life. Today, we're focused on COVID-19 and getting ready to go back to school for the upcoming school year. My name is Brittany L. Wright, and I'm representing Insight News. And on behalf of the African American Leadership Forum, before we get started, I want to give a very special thanks to our sponsors, the Minneapolis Foundation, North Point Health and Wellness, and Children's Minnesota for making this town hall possible. I also want to say thank you to our partners, which include North Point, Children's Minnesota, Insight News, the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder, and Minnesota Community Care. So today's virtual town hall is part one of a part two series. Today we'll begin our conversation on COVID-19 and preparing for the upcoming school year by addressing the varying levels of concerns for parents, educators, scholars, et cetera. And then next week, we'll continue the conversation by sitting down with a few of the folks who have had to make some really difficult decisions within their districts, who will be communicating the logistics of how to have the safest school year possible. That conversation is going to take place next Wednesday, the 19th at 11:30 a.m. And it will be broadcast live to the African American Leadership Forum Facebook page and YouTube channel. But for today's conversation, I want to introduce our panelists. First, I'm joined by Ms. Adriene Thornton, who is a nurse and infection preventionist with Children's Minnesota. Welcome back, Adriene. Good morning.
Good morning.
Also joining us is Walker, who is the Director of Black Student Achievement for the Minneapolis Public School System. Welcome, Mr. Walker.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Also joining us is our youth voice for the conversation. We have Khyri Lueben, who was a student at Howard University and a resident of St. Paul. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Also joining us is Ms. Mack, who is the co-creator of the Black Family Blueprint and a homeschooling mother. Welcome, Ayo.
Thank you. Thanks for having me this morning.
Also joining us is Monshari Chandler, who is the Director of Operations for PICA Head Start. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
And last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Angela Deleon joining us, who is a social worker for the Brooklyn Center Elementary School. Welcome.
Thank you, good morning.
Thank you for being here. So, really quick, I want everyone to just kind of do a go round. We typically start with heavy COVID data, and I'm gonna pivot to Adriene in a minute, but I just wanna go down the list and hear everybody's thoughts. This is the We Good virtual town hall. I wanna know, are you feeling good about this upcoming school year? What are your thoughts on how we should move forward?
Very carefully. You know, it's hard because I understand that kids, they need an outlet. Their education is important, but the socialization that comes with that education is important as well. But keeping them safe and healthy is just as important. And so I am torn between the two because I don't think they should go back to school because we don't have the infrastructure to support sending them safely back to school. But I do want them to go back to school at some point. But I don't think right now we have the infrastructure to support that and to keep them safe and to implement everything that we need to implement to keep transmission of COVID from occurring once they go back. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag.
Got it. Khyri, how do you feel about going back to school? You're choosing not to be physically on the Howard campus right now. So tell me your thoughts on going back.
Yeah, so I decided not to go back originally because a lot of the stuff, because it was like getting bad, you know, and a lot of our classes just went to online because they wanted less dense classrooms and they really only wanted like big lecture halls and they just be spaced out, but I just didn't think it was a good idea. And then a few days ago, they actually told us that that no one would be staying on campus and that all the classes would be online. So it really didn't affect me, but I knew a lot of people that it affected. But I thought it was probably for the best, and I agreed with their final decision to do that.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. That's good to know. Miss Ayo, how do you feel about going back? You're in a unique position because your children were already doing education in the home.
Yeah, so actually I had my now fifth grader who was homeschooled and my first grader who went to traditional school. And so we had one foot in and one foot out. We had, we had to still deal with the distance learning piece. Going back to school feels very scary. And we had wanted to wait a little while before we brought the first grader on into our homeschool life. But he's going to be joining us this time around. It just feels so scary and so unstable. I've been an early childhood teacher. I've been in elementary school settings, and it's very hard to just get children to wash their hands regularly and to social distance regularly. So to add COVID on top of it makes it feel like a really unstable situation in terms of keeping our children and families safe.
Got it. Thank you. Monshari, now you also are around young people also. So from your perspective, would you recommend that the little ones go back? What are your thoughts on going back to school this year?
Absolutely. So, I think I mentioned previously that my thoughts for this, for going back to school this fall they're very conflicted. But I do also recognize that there's a bit of a difference between what's happening with high school and middle school and elementary school. There are larger numbers of students who, they would be hard pressed to figure out how to keep them distanced, to how to make sure that everyone is remaining or following best practices and washing hands and keeping everything sanitized. There are a lot bigger spaces. But in Head Start, we actually opened this week on Monday for a small group of students. We decided to go with a rolling start with small groups of students and staff to see how we could roll this out and work out kinks, and those smaller groups allow for a lot more social distancing. The student to child ratio is a lot smaller, and I feel like we're in a controlled enough setting to be able to practice all of the safety measures that would be in place to keep this a healthy environment for both our staff and for our students.
Good, awesome. And Angela, how are you feeling about this upcoming school year? Have you all started already?
No, decision was made yesterday, came out yesterday, in terms of how Brooklyn Center Community Schools will operate in the fall, or September 8th. I'm slightly terrified. Like many parents, many folks who work in the school building, I can't, especially, so we have pre-K, we have our early learners through 5th grade. I could not throughout this envision how we could do this safely as I picture my kids that I work with, right? My oldest daughter kind of cracked me up, but it gave me a really clear snapshot of like, yes, this is exactly what we're talking about. She kind of made a joke, but it was like very serious. She's got a 6-year-old who's going into 1st grade, and she said, it'll be my kid who comes in and sees another kid with a Spider-Man mask and like takes it off his face and puts it on his face, and they want to swap masks, and I said, yep, funny, but not funny, right? Because I don't know how we could do it with the little. So I am nervous.
Yeah.
Rightfully so. Mr. Walker, how are you feeling about this upcoming school year?
I think many people have already stated it's kind of like mixed emotions with it, right? As much as we want to get students back into school and back into normalcy, we have to realize that if we go back into school, even in a hybrid model, there's not going to be any sense of normalcy. We will have students who are socially distanced in the classroom. There's not going to be the same opportunities to hang out in the hallways, to sit in the cafeterias and eat lunch together and do that social learning that we are talking about. So it's in the best interest for us to stay out until we can get that under control so that people can be safe. And so, you know, I have 4 kids of my own. So I have 2 that are in, well, one's in high school, one's in middle school, and then 2 that are in elementary. And kind of what Miss Angela stated is that I know my 2 that are in elementary, the likelihood of them being able to be still and keep that mask on and washing their hands consistently and not wanting to touch their friends or not wanting to touch their teacher is going to be tough for them. And so in order to keep everybody safe, I think the best decision is to do the virtual learning model right now at this time.
Thank you. Well, why don't we go ahead at this point and really see what is the data showing us regarding COVID, right? This is the elephant in the room, the overall concern of whether or not we should go back, and if so, how. Adriene, can you ground us in what the data is showing?
Sure. So let's start with Minnesota. We are continuing to see increasing cases. It's not going down, but it may be slowing down ever so slightly, but we are still seeing an increase in cases. We're up to a little over 62,000 cases total as of today. 1,600 of those are deaths. We still have 5,000 people that have been hospitalized, and we today have 154 people in the ICU that are sick with COVID. So we're still continuing to see issues, and the number of people in ICU is increasing, which says to me that the seriousness of the illness is increasing as well. Because before we were seeing a lot of hospitalizations and not a lot of ICU stays, and now we're seeing more intensive care unit stays. As a country, we are up to over 5 million cases. We have over 162,000 deaths. Now, let me explain something. I keep hearing people talk about, oh, well, it's just like influenza. People die from influenza. We are on pace to have 3 times as many deaths from COVID-19 as we did from influenza last season. When you look at the top 3 causes of death in the U.S., there's cancer, there's heart disease and strokes. COVID-19 is on pace to be the 3rd leading cause in the U.S. of all deaths. Right now, accidents, which are unintentional, which includes car accidents, falls, those types of things, right now, that is the 3rd leading cause of death in the U.S. at 169,000. So with just 7,000 more COVID deaths, COVID-19 will take over as the 3rd leading cause of death in the U.S. No one should be okay with that. We can't continue to say, oh, it's a hoax, oh, it's going to go away, oh, it's not that serious, it's just like influenza, because none of that is true. It is a serious disease. Transmission continues to occur because we don't have everyone on the same page in terms of how we should manage it, and we're seeing a lot more deaths, which is concerning. So that is where we are today, and I hope that everyone keeps in mind, when I looked at the numbers and saw how close we were to COVID-19 being the 3rd leading cause of death, that really startled me because I knew we had a lot of deaths. I didn't realize we had that much death from this disease. That is a problem because we are talking about diseases and conditions and things that have been around for decades, and COVID-19 has barely been here a year, haven't been here a year, and it's already moving up to the number 3 spot. That is a huge problem. It's a huge concern, and people need to take that information, dwell on it, and then figure out what we can all do collectively to prevent this from occurring.
Thank you. You and I had a conversation. It may have even been, I can't remember if it was in a production meeting or if it was in a previous town hall, but we talked about the summer camp in Georgia and how there was this high number of young people who contracted the virus, but you were saying that wasn't, it's a false indicator because the camp didn't practice the proper guidelines for, can you explain kind of where they went wrong and how that number could have been significantly decreased?
Yes, so with that camp, they did several things wrong. They had multiple children staying in the cabins, and so I think the cabins had 6 beds per cabin, and they had 6 children staying in those cabins together with closed windows and maybe ceiling fans or window fans or some type of fan, but not enough air circulating, but also not able to maintain distancing between them. Everyone was not wearing masks. The staff weren't wearing masks. A lot of the children weren't wearing masks. There were no face shields in place for the staff. And so everything that we're recommending people do, they didn't do it. And so it was expected that transmission would occur, and it did, and it was bad, and they had to shut the camp down as a result. I don't know how many children or staff died from that outbreak, that cluster, but it was a problem because had they taken a few extra steps, had maybe 3 children in the cabin instead of 6, they could have at least maintained the distance between the children. If they had opened the windows, all of the windows and maybe a door to allow for fresh air to come through and clean the air as much as possible with just 3 children in the cabin, that may have decreased transmission. So there are different things they could have done that they didn't do that would have prevented that transmission from occurring. But because they didn't think it was a real situation, they didn't take it seriously, a lot of people got it, they had to close the camp, and children ended up sick as a result.
Got it. You know, we have a question from the audience about why are districts not using infection rates as a basis for returning to school? Angela, I'm wondering, with your district making the decision yesterday, was this a part of the conversation? Are you aware of how they were able to come to this decision for your district?
Yes, I believe it was. They are tracking the numbers, and pretty much just said, like, this is where we are now. Like, at any point we could go either direction. Like, well, actually not either direction. I think we would stay with the plan now, which is what they call a limited campus hybrid model. But most of our students will be online, and at least for the first quarter, that will be what it is. I think if we need to go to a more restrictive model based on the numbers increasing, then that will happen as well. But yes, they are making the decisions based on the numbers.
Got it. Michael, what is Minneapolis Public Schools saying about the numbers, and what are you anticipating your semester will look like?
Yeah, and we have made a decision already to do distance learning or virtual learning for the first quarter of the school year, and it was based on the numbers and not just the traditional numbers, right? So we disaggregated that information to find out what was those numbers like for the Black population, for our Latinx communities, similar to when we look at like unemployment rate, like our national average for unemployment rate may be at 5%, but for the Black unemployment rate, it may be upwards to 12%. We're seeing those same numbers when we're looking at the COVID cases around, like, I think it's the governor said something about 25 per 10,000 infections. That's how those numbers is how he's making the decision on if you should do hybrid or in-person or distance learning. And I think last week when we were making that decision, Hennepin County was at 25 per 10,000. But when you disaggregate that data and you start to look at our families of color or communities of color, it was upwards to 50 per 10,000. And so we made the decision to do that. And also along with that, we don't have the capacity in some of our buildings to actually provide the hybrid model as well. So that was also a barrier for us, so that we were trying to make the right decisions on safety and then using those numbers as well.
Okay, so then in the distance learning, what provisions are being put in place to ensure that students who are already struggling don't get further marginalized? Like, what does support look like at a distance?
Yeah, I think that's always going to be a spot where we're trying to figure out, right? As I would share with folks, is that we have to realize that we were already having disparities when we were face to face. And so those disparities don't just go away. We have to definitely be mindful of that. And so right now the district is putting plans together to figure out how to be in more communication with our students and families. And so one way that they're doing that is trying to have a schedule. So in the fall, it wasn't really like a technical schedule that people were having to abide by. So now they're having a schedule that they will have to abide by as teachers and staff members to deliver the lessons and curriculum for our students. It doesn't mean that students will be online for those times, but teachers are accessible during those times that they would have their traditional classes. So it's trying to figure those pieces out.
Okay, so it's not that you are going to follow the same schedule necessarily that you would last year, but there's a particular time that your educator will be available. You can essentially do school at any time of your choosing. Is that correct?
No, it's not any time of your choosing. So it's like how it's trying to mirror what a traditional classroom would be like, so that students have the information to be able to access their teachers at certain times. So like if I was in a traditional face-to-face and I had period 1 math from 8 to 9, right? Now you would still have that period 1 math from 8 to 9. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be face-to-face or virtually the entire time, but that teacher is available during that 8 to 9 period for your questions or support if you are in need of that.
Got it.
Does that make sense or explain it?
Yes, no, that's helpful. You know, a big question I think that a lot of us have is, how do we support those who are already struggling, who are already marginalized? You brought up a great point during our production meeting about older students and how some of them may be responsible for having to care for your siblings. How do you care for a child as a child and your education? You know, there are so many different barriers being put in place. Has the district talked about, or that are just a reality of our scholars' lived experience? Has the district talked about, what if I'm a student and I do have to take care of my sibling at the same time and we only have one device? Like, are there exceptions to make sure that we're not disciplining people for having home environments that maybe aren't the most supported in distance learning?
Yeah, we're definitely having those detailed and intentional conversations about how do we support those students in those spaces, and families in those spaces. One thing that we're working on right now is ensuring that every one of our students have a device. So that's part of the rollout, so that students will have access and they will have their device to be able to access the virtual learning platform. And then they are coming up with some grading policies that will be conducive for that support around our students who may have additional responsibilities that have been placed on them, because we know with COVID, as we were talking about, essential workers, a lot of those essential workers are people of color. And so then that means that we will have some of the older siblings that may be taking on some adult responsibilities in the home to make sure that their younger siblings are getting that academic support that they need. So we are having those conversations and trying to figure those things out. One thing I can say is, like, our department as the Office of Black Student Achievement is, we are doing those wellness checks to check in and be advocates for those students and those families, so that if they are having issues or need to connect with other educators or their math teachers or whatever, to have those conversations, we can be a support and advocate for them so that they're not being penalized for what is their reality. So we are definitely trying to make sure that doesn't happen and impact our students in a negative way.
Perfect. Ayo, I want to hear from you on work-life balance. Michael mentioned that a lot of parents are essential workers, and other parents are going to be working from home. And I think we're all also having the question of, how do I maintain my job and make sure my children are doing what they need to do school-wise, or just even mitigating, you know, behavior and lunch and all the things. How are we doing this? For you, as someone who was running a business already and homeschooling already, how do you find the work-life balance?
I would say that I wouldn't necessarily call it a balance. I would say work and life have more of like a symbiotic relationship, and that they just kind of flow together. And so when you homeschool, you don't have to have a rigid schedule. It doesn't have to be 7:30 to 3:30. You know, it doesn't have to be like that. We take time in our evenings. We take time early morning. I have an early riser who wakes up at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And so we utilize that time. We utilize car time when we're traveling. We utilize the weekends. We homeschool kind of around the clock, because our perspective around education is that it happens all the time. And so oftentimes I may have a meeting and I'll have my child or both of my children with me, and they'll be working on their activity while I'm having a meeting. Even now they're doing some science and exploration pieces from some science gifts that they got for their birthday, and they're building, you know, cars and racetracks and things. And so we utilize that as part of their education. And so yeah, there's really no balance, but there's an equitable distribution of time and where it needs to go. And sometimes more than one thing happens at a time. And so it's really around, for us, cultivating our children and understanding when it's work time, when it's independent time, when it's family time, when it's quiet time, building those boundaries and structures around what our work looks like, and helping them understand that we do work. And this is the reason why we work. Y'all want this house, don't you? You want those clothes and those toys, so that they grow up understanding and really seeing what hard work looks like and how those benefits, how that benefits the family. So yeah, it's not just the balance, more of a relationship, an interconnected relationship amongst all the things.
For sure. You know, that makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering, you made the decision to start homeschooling your youngest, so he'll now be joining your other son who's already homeschooling.
Yeah.
What made you want to switch to homeschooling for him versus allowing him to do distance learning?
So I've always wanted to homeschool. So I'll preface this with that. COVID-19 just kind of gave us the alley-oop to begin that process much sooner. With distance learning, I've never been fully pleased with our current education system. We are Minneapolis public school family. We live within the district. Both my husband and I are products of Minneapolis public schools, and we are products of all of the beautiful things and all of the really ugly things and all of the institutionalized racism that exists in that system, in terms of how children are educated and also in terms of how staff are treated in the school system. And so with looking at distance learning, it really helped us see even more of the gaps in the education. And I just believe that since we're already doing this with our older child, that if we're going to be at home and we're going to do education at home, then there's so many more things that we can add to it if we're in full control over the curriculum and the things that our child is learning. Our first grader, who, you know, we raise our children with Black consciousness. They know who they are. They know where they come from. They understand their people. They're beginning to understand what oppression looks like. And so it's like every time we send him to school, even if he's sitting in front of a computer and likely looking at a white teacher, what we're teaching at home is being dismantled, like bit by bit by bit. And so we're just making a decision to opt out for that reason. And he's an academic, like academically, he's very excellent. And we believe we can push him farther, faster in homeschool than in the confines of distance learning.
That's really important. That's a big part of the reason why we wanted to make sure that you were on this panel, is for parents to recognize that this could be the moment where we really start to think about customizing our scholars' education, where we really start to look. We've always, I feel like, looked critically at the way in which our scholars receive education within the public school system and even sometimes within the private school system. But this could be the moment that we really start to reimagine what a culturally relevant curriculum or a culturally relevant educational experience could look like. And for some of us, like Khyri, like he was already on that journey because he was going to an HBCU. As I mentioned in the intro, he's a student at Howard University going into his sophomore year. And as someone who went to a PWI, went to the University of Minnesota, I know how special it must be to be able to have educators and all of your peers who look like you. They always say the HBCU, it's not just you going to college, you're going for an experience. It's an experience. You finished that for a little bit and you had to come home because of COVID. So I'm curious for you, how this pandemic shaped your experience and your ability to connect with your culture and with your people.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's really a unique experience there that I really wasn't used to here. So I just want to start off by saying that and really, and, you know, endorse and really, and say how important that was. But yeah, so it was really nice, you know, first semester, and then about halfway through second semester, you know, everything started getting crazy and we all had to go back home. Not really knowing, we actually came home for like spring break, not knowing I wasn't gonna come back. But yeah, like once we kind of realized like we weren't coming back, it was really interesting to see like what the school was gonna do. And even into next year, we didn't even think, you know, a lot of people didn't think that it was gonna be going this far. But yeah, it was really really tough to really like think that we probably missed a lot of stuff. that maybe we could have really enjoyed this semester as well as the second half of last semester. But I think as a whole, a lot of like people at my university, as well as a lot of my peers and my friends, really understand that it's like important to stay safe over possibly, you know, our experience. So.
I'm muted. There we go. I'm curious, what are your peers saying about COVID right now? Like, you obviously understood the severity of it because you chose, even before the school made the decision, you chose to do distance learning and to stay in Minnesota. But for other people that are your age, like, do people take it seriously? Does it feel like, are people saying that the school is overreacting? Like, what are people in your age range? How are they responding to COVID?
I would say most of my friends and my peers, especially at first, you know, kind of realized the severity and did take it very serious and like do wear masks all the time wherever they go and stuff and really try to social distance and all that. But I definitely have a few friends that, you know, still want to like start, you know, getting out and like partying and stuff and having fun with probably larger gatherings than they should be in. But I would say for the most part, a lot of my friends are really, you know, like focused on, you know, trying to do what they can to help their family stay safe and the people around them, and hopefully end this as quick as we can.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, I don't expect anything less from Howard University grads, but or for Howard University students, but I'm glad to hear that for sure. I'm also curious because not only did you come back to Minnesota on spring break and you ended up staying, but there was an uprising. You had a very unique experience from people who had to go back home and who lived in other states. Like, we're in the epicenter of it. So what they experienced was a lot of it was a ripple effect of what was happening in your hometown. How did COVID and the George Floyd uprising, how has that impacted your whole outlook on education and just your role as a Black male and scholar?
Yeah, it really made me like appreciate all the people around me and especially like my university and like how much it taught me, you know, about like Black empowerment and you know, just like everything Black and how important it is to really have that be like important to you. But yeah, it was really crazy because I went down to the memorial a few times. I've been to a couple of protests, and yeah, it was really cool to see like literally like everybody I know and all my friends going to protests in their cities that lived in like California, New York, and Georgia and all that stuff. So it was really cool, and I feel like really important to you know, see them all do that. And I really felt like it really brought a lot of people together and showed that we really need to you know, put our best foot forward and really stop all this.
Absolutely. And I think it pointed to what we've known for years, right? Is Minnesota is one of the highest ranking states in terms of the best place to live in the US, or the second best place to live. And yet we have like the second worst disparities in the country simultaneously. So we really are not just the Twin Cities, but a tale of two cities where there are people who look like all of us on this call having a particular experience. And that matters, especially when we talk about this pandemic that disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities. And those are the people who I feel like have a serious disadvantage when it comes to education and what could potentially happen. I feel like that's part of who PICA serves. Is that correct, Monshari? Oh, you're muted still.
Yes, absolutely. You know, we in our program we serve, or we're funded to serve 2,500 children, and of the 2,500 children, all of our families, in order to qualify for Head Start services, have to be at or below the income poverty guideline. So pretty close to 100% of the families that we serve are Black and Brown people. They're families that are people of color, and it is, as a program that works with that community, you know, we see that there are a lot of disparities between what our families have access to, or what services are available to them in other places, especially in communities where you know, the services are not so evident. That, you know, with our job is to help to connect them with what, you know, resources there are that, you know, put them on the same level playing ground as their children of the same, of their peers. I'm sorry, of, uh, I'm sorry, I'm distracted. But of other ethnicities.
For sure. And so what do you feel like the parents of your scholars are going to need in order to be successful? So you guys are going to do a version of in-person education. But beyond that, you know, what have you seen? You're only in week 1. Do you know, so like what it's going to take to really be successful in this year?
Well, we have been continuing to operate since COVID started. We closed our centers in early March, but continued to provide services to families from then up until now, virtually. And what we saw initially as a need was making sure that our families had access to food, making sure that our families had access to essential items, making sure that our families had access to the resources, because a lot of things were new. People were figuring out how to get things out. People were getting grants or finding the funds to be able to provide things in the community. And we know that at PICA that our families see us as a lifeline to a lot of those resources and supports, and not physically being in the space where people could come to, or, you know, their children are in school every day. And so we see them every day and we share things with them in this physical way. We had to figure out how to make sure that we continue to connect them to those resources. So what we did was we restructured our staff to not just be teachers anymore, but to be family support workers. And their jobs were to call families every week, multiple times a week, and make sure that they knew what resources were out there, and to help them to really to eliminate the barriers to reaching those resources, whether it was knowing where to find the link, or knowing who has a resource available, or making sure that they understand what the deadlines and the guidelines are so that they can access those things. We also saw that a barrier or a need for our families was in financial support. So we restructured our budget so that we could put out financial emergency stipends to all 2,500 of our families. And so we continue to support them through this, from March through now, with additional financial supports, so that they can access or purchase essential items that food stamps don't buy.
PICA has a very holistic approach to not just the model in which students, your scholars, are engaging in the actual facility, but making sure that parents have the necessary support outside as well, it sounds like, which is really important. And I want to ask Angela, who is a social worker, that's part of your work also, is the holistic assessment of your scholars' needs, not just while they're in the actual facility, but making sure that they're safe and cared for, even at home. A big concern that we discussed in our production meeting was like, what about people, scholars who have special needs, or who have a particular learning style, or, you know, set of circumstances where they could use some extra support and care? What does your role look like now that we are in the pandemic, and how are those students who need the extra support going to get it?
I'm assuming that at any moment, pretty much based on that our decision on the fall came out yesterday, I will be asked to step into spaces where I am reaching out to families. I was able to be part of a team over the summer who did some community outreach and surveying of our families to just kind of assess their needs and assess like where they're at, right? In terms of like, where do we go from here? What would you desire? And anxiety is so high. It's so high just across the board, for all of us. Honestly, I'm not only concerned about our scholars and our families, I'm concerned about our staff. The anxiety of our teachers is such that I don't know how that's going to present in actually teaching. We talk about disparities and equitable education. I mean, there's so many things to keep our eyes on, right? And teachers' ability to even be focused on what they need to be focused on. And I don't say that in a way of, I mean, I have so much respect for my colleagues, right? And what they're doing. I don't mean that they would be intentionally doing harm or maybe doing any harm at all. But it's something that we have to be aware of, right? We have to be aware of, like, trying to take care of everybody during this time. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. I'm assuming that is going to be the bulk of my job moving forward. The bulk of my time and responsibility is checking in with families, trying to show up and just see where they're at in what they need. In the spring, it was interesting because we had to find that balance of, like, this is so unfamiliar to all of us, and it will be in the fall as well. Even though we had a little go at it in the spring, some families were kind of like in such a place that they didn't want that twice a week check-in, right? They're just like, just let us be for a minute and try to figure this out. I don't know where we're going or what we're doing. And so there's a balance of that and not trying to overstep and cross boundaries into families and in their lives, but also, like, show up, be there for them, figure out what they need, provide resources. It all needs to be handled, like, delicately, but diligently at the same time.
Still muted. I said absolutely. That's the perfect set of words, delicately and diligently. Speaking of special needs, I have a family member who he's autistic, and he had been exhibiting some symptoms. He's an asthmatic. We weren't sure, is he having regular chest tightness because of his asthma, or could it be COVID? And, when I talked to his mom, I said, well, why don't you just take him to get tested? It's free, And she said, well, you have to remember he's autistic. A doctor sticking a swab up his nose would have him absolutely freak all the way out. I don't think he would be able to take it. And so I'm curious, Adriene, especially as we talk about back to school and back those who are going in person to get their education, or even if they're just being exposed to other people within their home, need to get more young people tested, right? How can this be done in a way, because we've had adults on this show talk about freaking out about the test. Like, how do we make this possible and accessible to where we're not traumatizing our kids, but we also feel empowered enough for parents to know that their children can get tested and it won't be a huge spectacle? How does this work? Is there an alternative to the nose swab?
There is. So in addition to the nose swab, we can do a swab through the mouth. However, it is just as invasive as the nose swab because the coronavirus tends to live in the very back of your nose and throat, where your respiratory tract really collects organisms. And so in order for us to get a really good sample, you have to get back there and get it. The other ways to test for it are actually much more invasive. So, for instance, in some of our ICU patients, if they're on a ventilator where they have the breathing tube down their mouth, we have taken samples from those breathing tubes to see if we could yield any of the virus. Those tests aren't as good. The best test, of course, is the nose swab, where they stick the swab through your nose and they go as far back as they can. Basically, they just keep going until it stops, and then they twirl 3 or 4 times. And that is the best test on the market right now. So unfortunately, anything we do is going to be potentially traumatizing to people. And so, it's hard. I work at children's. We have children all the time, and we hate to do that to them because we know that for some of them, it is really going to be hard for them to recover from that. However, if you weigh the risk versus the benefits, the risk of them being traumatized versus the benefit of them getting the test done, the benefits outweigh the risk. And so for your friend who has a child that's autistic, I think what I would recommend is if they go to a clinic or to a hospital or wherever, see if there is a child-like person that can work with them to help them figure out how to get it done without traumatizing the child. If there are things that you can do with your child that instantly makes them happy, focus on that. So for instance, say, well, let's get this test done and then we'll go home and we'll play Uno or, help them find their happy first and focus on their happy place and then add the test into that thought so that when they think about it, yes, I don't like this thing in my nose and it's really bothering me, but as soon as she gets it done or he gets it done or whomever, I can go home and play Uno with mom. And so they're focusing on that as opposed to the test. And so you just kind of have to redirect children's thoughts so that they don't focus on what's really, bothering them at that moment, because it's such a short amount of time that they're doing the test and they can go quickly. It's not like they're standing there and they're swabbing for, minutes on end. It's in, do, and out. And so it's really fairly quick, but you just have to redirect our children's thoughts so they don't focus on that and don't present it as though, oh, well, now this is going to bother you and you may not like it. Let's not say that to our kids. Let's just be honest. You need to get this test done. It's not going to be the best test in the world. You won't like it, but you'll be okay. You will survive it. You will get past it. And if you have to do it again, which you never know, they may have to be tested again at some point, you will do fine. I have faith in you. I know you can do it. And so focus on the positive rather than the negative. And that tends to go a long way, especially with little children. We're really good at Children's Hospital about distracting little kids and convincing them to think a certain way so that they don't focus on the test itself. And so if people need pointers, I'm sure their primary care physician can help them. Children's has child life specialists that can help with giving pointers for that. So, just focusing on the positive, redirecting their thoughts and their attention and getting the test done. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot of options out there.
Mm-hmm. Can I piggyback on what Adriene has said about children and taking their focus off of things? What we thought would be helpful or beneficial to our families is to bring testing into our sites and into our community so that remove the barrier to testing for them, and then provided an opportunity for families to be tested together. So we worked with the state and with the cities to bring in a big testing event at our Brooklyn Center site. And it was a very successful event, but we got 1,164 people tested in one day, which broke their record. It's the highest number of people that they were able to test in a day. But what was great about that was that we had families that were pulling up in the car and it was a drive-through testing, and it was mom and sister and aunt who lives in the house and the child, and everyone got tested together. And I think that removed a lot of the fear for kids that came to testing with their family. This is a place that I'm familiar with, and this is with my family. And it also helped to have good screeners who did a really nice job with distracting kids. I witnessed one that told the child, let's practice wiggling your toes, and we're going to count to 3, and they kind of helped to remove some of the fears and to distract them. And then we brought a second event because it was so successful to our Northside site at Fraser, right behind Harvest Prep, yesterday, and was able to test about 776 more people, and more children showed up at that event with their families. So I think that helps too, to be able to bring testing to a place that kids are familiar with, and to be tested as a family so that they see mom is doing it, and I can do it too.
That's a great point. And I'm curious, especially with you working with much younger scholars, what are you telling them about COVID? Like, are you guys having conversations even at the Head Start age on what's happening?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mentioned that we've been continuing to work with families virtually since March. We've been putting out, some videos for families and some information and some ways to talk to their kids about COVID. Our teachers are recording themselves and talking about, they're reading stories to kids and talking about germs and sharing with them things like, COVID is a germ that, if you do what you're supposed to do, like, washing hands and, these kinds of things, you help this germ to not hurt you or to hurt others. So we're having lots of conversations virtually with parents and creating videos for kids so that they can understand COVID. We have several nurses that are on staff too, and they've created some resources and some videos to show to our families. We sent the videos out through YouTube and through our text notification system so that parents can share them with their kids. But this last video was to show children how to wear their mask the right way and, the best way, and, practicing on their teddy bears, or, making sure that they wear just their mask, kinds of things. And, we've also put out some other videos that were specific to parents to help them to, start talking to their kids about what they can expect when they come back to school. Because now they're going to see their teachers in a different way. Their faces are covered, and taking into consideration those children who have, other abilities, I like to call them, that, are maybe frightened by seeing people in masks all the time, and recognizing that they, sometimes rely on your cues and clues from your face to know what to expect. So lots of conversations with our parents and resources for kids to know what to expect and how to wear masks and what COVID is, understanding what COVID is about.
That's really important. Adriene, I saw an article this morning when I was putting together the agenda, because I wanted to get this number right. They said that there were 97,000 school-age children who have contracted the virus in the U.S. in the last 2 weeks. And so I'm curious, do you attribute that to people who have started school early? Is it just that more young people got tested because school is starting? What does that number tell you about what's happening?
It tells me that it's a little bit of everything. So it's not just one variable that's causing this increase. There are several variables. And so the first variable is all the lovely pictures that you see on social media and on the news of families getting together and having big gatherings, and nobody's wearing a face mask. So that's number one. And especially in the South, where people are not really wanting to follow the guidelines, we are seeing a lot more children test positive for COVID because of things like the camp that, the church had, where all the children and the staff transmitted COVID, and the schools. For instance, the school in Paulding County, where the pictures were taken and the students were in the hallway, and there were, it was just like any other day where you have hundreds of kids in the hallway. Some had on masks, some didn't. Kids got together in front of the school, several of them, and took pictures. Nobody had on masks. And so that's one part of it. We are seeing more testing. We are getting more test kits throughout the United States. So that's part of it. But also just, again, the state of the world, that everyone is not following the guidelines. And so I think we're seeing more kids get it. Before, we were keeping our kids home, we were keeping them safe, and we were making sure that everybody wore a mask. and we were keeping our distance. And now that people are tending to trend away from that, now we're seeing the results of that, which is more children are testing positive for COVID and getting the disease than they were before. And that's going to continue to happen unless we can dial back our practices and really focus a lot on social distancing and wearing the mask and washing our hands frequently, which some people just don't believe is going to make a difference, which is unfortunate.
Michael, I want to ask you, in our production meeting, you mentioned people having loyalty to the legacy as a flaw in either the public school system or the way that people are responding to the pandemic, or possibly a combination of all of those factors. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, just that basically it really states that what we've always done is the way we're going to continue to do things. And we have to challenge those loyalty to legacies in order to change and make better for our students and for our families, specifically around this virtual learning process, right? If we're thinking we're just going to be able to replicate what we did in the classroom virtually, we are sadly mistaken, because we'll continue those same disparities. If we think we're going to go back to schools and create or do the same thing that we've always been doing, we're going to create those same disparities. So we got to challenge those policies, those procedures, those things that we have always done, so that we can be better for our students to get better results. Some of that is not being silent, right? How do we ensure that we are listening to those unfamiliar voices that are not usually or traditionally at the tables when we are making those decisions? One thing that I've been trying to be mindful of in the work that we do in the Office of Black Student Achievement in our department is, how do we allow student voice to propel the work that we're doing? And so we're always asking questions of our students of, how can we be better to support you, so that we can incorporate that into the work that we're doing? And so now we're transitioning, saying that, how do we allow and push that toward the district level, so that they are also listening to student voice? The other piece is, we have to be mindful that someone talked about majority of our teachers are white in our school system. I think it was Miss Mack who said that, which is true, right? There's 80% of our teachers are white, or if not more than that. And when we're making these decisions, especially about our community, is that most of the times we are having our staff who are licensed staff members at the table when they're making those decisions, which will be a majority of white folks that are making those decisions. What I'm saying is, how do we get those unfamiliar voices who we know that represent our community, which is our non-licensed staff positions, our support staff, right? They should also be part of these decision-making process, because they have an ear to the ground. They are in the community, so they will know some information and insight that some of our licensed staff may not know, that can help us make better decisions. And so that's on us as an institution to be better and more intentional about listening to those voices and perspectives. And that's some of the things that we're doing in the Office of Black Student Achievement, is pushing those types of thoughts, those type of agendas, to say, hey, we can't just keep doing what we've always done, because we're going to get the same results that we've always gotten. Let's listen to other voices, let's listen to other perspectives, and let's bring them to the table. And we also have to be mindful that if we're just listening and not utilizing it to do anything, then I'm not going to tell you anything anymore. So as we're getting that information, we also got to implement some of those strategies, some of those things that they're sharing with us, so that they know that their voices matter and it counts and it's valuable, and that we can also grow and become better at that. It basically just goes to this quote that one of my favorite people say, Malcolm X. He always talks about where his quote is, "I for one believe that if you give people a thorough understanding of what confronts them and the basic causes that produces it, they'll create their own program. And when the people create a program, you get action. And I would add, you get results." And so that's what we're trying to do. How do we be able to create our own program so that we can get those actions and results that will benefit our people?
Absolutely. Someone in the comments asked, how do you all feel about 2 days on and 2 days off scenario, like a hybrid model? Do you feel like that? I know you said that there was some limitations on your physical space, Michael, but would you entertain this in the future?
When you say, I guess I want to know if I'm understanding the question right. When you say 2 days on, 2 days off, are you talking about 2 days on virtually, or are you talking about actually face-to-face in school? Is that what that question is asking?
I think they're referring to face-to-face in school.
Face-to-face? Yeah, like I said, I'm not ready for that. Again, I think that we need to be mindful of that, again, because if we're sending our students back to that space, again, we're not sending them back to anything that's normal anyway, right? So the benefits that would happen in the school may not be there when we think we're going to get that social experience. That's not going to be there when we get back to those face-to-face things. So in my estimation, we should be worried about more about safety of people, right? And so that means we may have to pause, take a step back. As we're talking about disparities, I also want to mention that everybody is dealing with this at the same time. So we want to make sure that we're using terms and language that is not deficit thinking, because a lot of folks are going to be coming at this at different ways and different perspectives. And so I don't want to necessarily say people have lost anything. We just had a pause on the learning right now. We just had a pause on certain things that have occurred, and we're going to pick that back up when things are better for us as a community. And so that's kind of the mind frame that I am trying to push within our department, which hopefully will permeate throughout our district.
You know what, that's really important, the mindset shift. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Adriene.
Yeah, I just want to speak to the 2 days on, 2 days off. You know, it really doesn't matter how many days you are on or off if you don't have the proper infrastructure in place. So for instance, if you send 100 kids to school and there are 20 kids in the classroom for 2 days, you might as well send them to school for 5 days, because they could be exposed to and transmit COVID in those 2 days that they're there, because that 20 kids in the classroom is too many. You can't maintain social distance. If you have little kids, it is really hard to get them to keep the mask on. And so if you have, 5 of them in the classroom, perhaps you can manage it better to try and get them to keep their mask on. But if you have 20 in the classroom, that is very difficult to manage. So it's not about how many days they're in a classroom versus home. It's what are we doing with the kids if they are in a classroom. That is what is more important versus, how many days they're in class. Again, if you have 20 kids in the classroom, you could go for 1 day. That would be way too many days in the classroom.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for that, Adriene. I want to go back to Michael. You were talking about just a mindset shift and the energy and the spirit that you intend to move forward with this upcoming school year. Have you been talking to your scholars at all to help kind of plant those seeds of optimism and give them something to feel excited about as we look forward to this distance learning?
Well, that's what we plan on doing when we first come back to school, right? We're not coming back, or when we come back virtually, we're not coming back going right into the curriculum. At least that's not what we're going to be promoting. We're going to be promoting, hey, again, how is your mental health? How are your well-being? What have you had to deal with? What was your summer like? What are some positive things that you experienced over your summer time off? Now we start to build this relationship, because again, we have to be mindful that teachers and students may be meeting each other for the very first time virtually now. So they're not going to have the benefit of being in the classroom. So now we're going to do this virtual connection. And so in order to create the condition for success to happen, we have to also create the environment for that to happen. And some of that is about creating space for people to be them authentic selves, to create space to say that I care about you as an individual. So then we can move forward with the learning piece. Because again, we know that old adage that if I don't care what you know or what you care about me until I know you care. I don't care what you teach me until you care. I might have got it all mixed up, but people know what I'm saying. So we have to make sure, we have to make sure we get that point right before we start to just jump into learning. And I think that's where the issue will come, is that if we try to jump right back into normalcy of here's the academic learning target and here's this and here's that, we are going to struggle with our scholars, because they're saying, hey, I need some time just to get back to the gist of what's going on in school. I need to, redirect myself. I need to recenter myself. And we should be able to take that time as educators to show that we care about your humanity, right? And the learning piece will come, because we'll be able to go further later if we take it slow. But I think sometimes we want to go fast at the beginning.
Excellent point. Absolutely excellent point. And I hope that more educators and those providing direct service do take that time to ground. I know for me, I'm overwhelmed, and I'm grown and I'm the parent, and a former educator. And so I can't imagine what our scholars are experiencing to involuntarily have these shifts happening, I want to go back to some of the questions in our chat box. Someone said that the Minnetonka rollout for half of their students, grades K through 8, is the off and on, 2 days on, 2 days off method. I guess that's the hybrid model. And so they didn't specifically ask a question, but I think the question could be for people who have, you know, their district told them that they have to participate in this hybrid model. If they feel uncomfortable with that, what are some ways in which they can help navigate or advocate for them, their families, and for their scholars specifically?
Well, you know, this is a great opportunity for parents to really insert themselves in their child's life, and their child won't be so upset about it. My 20-year-old doesn't like it when I insert myself in her life, but for the school-age children, they might actually appreciate it. And so parents need to look at their schools and see what are the schools doing to protect the kids and the staff. And so are they able to decrease the class size? And if not, are they able to provide instruction to the kids and still maintain that social distance? What are they doing to make sure that the kids are covered, their faces are covered, and are the staff able to keep their faces covered? That is going to be really difficult with the little kids, and I feel for anybody that has to try and teach little ones. I have a little grandbaby, and he is constantly moving, and he's constantly talking. And even when we go out in public, I struggle to get him to keep his mask on because he's a little over 2, and he just wants to talk and play with everybody. And especially if he sees his friends out, he wants to talk and play with them. And so parents are going to have to do a little bit more, making sure that your classroom has some alcohol hand rub. And if not, are you able to help provide that for the classroom? And if not, can you provide it for your own child? Can you put a little bottle of alcohol hand sanitizer? And this is for the older kids. I wouldn't send it with the really young kids, younger than 5, but just making sure that they have the tools that they need to provide a safe environment if they have to go back to school. There's a way to do it. It won't be easy because, again, it's not business as usual. We can't go back to school and do things the way we've done them before. There's going to have to be a difference. And so we can't put them all in a bubble, but if we can keep them apart, making sure that they're cleaning their hands and they're wearing their face coverings, that goes a long way to stopping the transmission. And so I just encourage parents to get as involved as they're able to. Ask the hard questions. You know, what are you doing to protect my child? What are you doing to protect yourself? And making sure that the schools have an area, for instance, if a child comes to sick and starts coughing or gets sick, there should be a designated area where the schools can keep those kids until someone is able to pick them up from school. And so letting them stay in the general classroom with other classmates when we know that they have symptoms, that should not occur. So things like that, just asking the tough questions, holding the schools accountable. They're doing the best they can do, but they could use some help. And holding people accountable doesn't mean that you're looking down on them or you're calling them on the carpet or that you're questioning their authority or what they're doing. It just means that you are in a collaborative relationship where everyone is working towards the same goal, which is keeping the kids and the staff safe during the school year. So parent involvement is going to be of the utmost importance this year to make sure that everyone is protected.
Absolutely. And I think especially if you have old enough to also voice their concerns and their experience, you know, that's incredibly important also. And there was a question about, you know, why isn't anyone better prepared? But there are guidelines, correct? The Minnesota Department of Health put together guidelines for every school on right. How they need to navigate. So it's not that people are totally making it up. It's going to look right. different likely at every place based on capacity, but there is a standard right. set of guidelines.
There is. The Minnesota Department of Health and the Minnesota Department of Education work together to develop guidelines. They are very long. There are pages and pages and pages, and I only know this because I've attempted to read through them over the last 3 days. There are a lot of guidelines because it's not just can we go back to school? If we do go back to school, here are the 3 different scenarios. And then what is the scenario for our special needs kids? And what about if a child becomes sick at school, or, what if a staff person becomes sick at school? And so the guidelines give recommendations for all of those scenarios. The problem that the schools are having is, how do we implement those guidelines? And it's going to be different from district to district, from school to school, and it's going to be variable depending on resources. Every school doesn't have the same amount of resources available. And so schools that are a little bit more resource available, we'll just say they have more resources available, they will be able to perhaps implement the guidelines a little bit easier than school districts that don't have as many resources, and they have more students that have fewer resources as well. All of that impacts the school district's ability to provide a safe education for the kids. And so it's not that they're not prepared, it's just that they're trying to take the resources they have, figure out how to make it work in the face of a pandemic that is continuing to spread and our numbers are increasing. And so they have to figure out, first of all, they have to determine which scenario do they follow based on the COVID numbers in their district. And then once they determine that, they have to figure out how to make that work. And then they have to have a contingency plan for, if the COVID numbers increase, then we're going to need to change our entire plan and go to another plan. And so it's just a lot of planning and preparing that is happening now, and they're as prepared as they can be. I mean, I think the schools are doing a great job trying to accommodate all the kids. But again, it's very much based on what resources the school districts have and the schools have, and then what resources the families have, because we have to provide for families that may have little or no resources to accommodate and help with getting kids back in school.
Thank you for that. Another question from the audience is, daycare facilities have been open since June. Why is this different?
It's a little different because, first let me say there has been transmission in daycare settings. We haven't heard as much about it, and I just saw a report come through my email from the CDC yesterday that looks at several cases of transmission within a daycare. So I want to put that out there. However, depending on the age of the daycare kids, that makes a huge difference. So for instance, my grandbaby that lives in Colorado, he is only 6 months old, and he goes to daycare every day because his mother works at a daycare. However, he is 6 months old. You put him in a holder, he sits there, and he is 6 feet away from his best friend, and they sit there and they talk to each other all day long from their little holder. So it's easier to keep the kids apart. You just wipe their little hands with some soap and water. They don't tend to, hover around each other as much. As the kids get older, it's a little more difficult. Also, we didn't have as many children going to daycare. So when you have fewer children to manage, it is much easier to maintain the distance and to get them to keep their mask on and to get them to wash their hands. And so all of that plays a part into the daycare arena. As we see more children going back to daycare, I'm sure the numbers will change. We'll see more transmission. It'll be a little bit more difficult because you won't be able to keep them apart. You won't be able to contain the kids and get them to do hand hygiene. And as you deal with more older kids going to daycare, it is much more difficult. Again, when they're babies, it's easy. You put them in the crib, you feed them, you love them, you can keep them apart, you can wipe their hands off, they don't need a mask on. But as the children get older, it gets to be a little bit more difficult. And so all of that plays a part into why we are seeing differences in daycare kids and school-age kids. And also school-age kids tend to have a mind of their own. And especially now when they've been home all summer long, they haven't seen their friends, they haven't been able to play. And when they get back to school, the first thing they're going to want to do is hug their friends, play with them, and hold hands and run down the hallway. And how do you keep them from doing that? That is going to be very hard, especially with the younger kids. With the older kids, the teenagers, they think they're invincible. They don't believe that it's going to happen to them. And so how do you keep them apart and keep the distance between them and get them to wear their mask when they think they're invincible and it won't happen to them? And so that is the biggest difference between the daycare and school-age children is, it's not as many kids in daycare. they're younger, they tend to be younger, so you can keep them apart. Whereas the school-age kids, there are more of them in the school, and they have a mind of their own. They tend to want to do what they want to do, from the little ones to the big ones. And so you have to contend not only with, you know, the distance and trying to get them to do it, what you need them to do, but also playing to their own minds and convincing them that they should listen to you when you say don't hold hands with your best friend, you know, and go clean your hands now because you just held his hand. And so those are the biggest differences between the daycare and the school-age kids. But again, as we see more kids going to daycare, I think we'll see some of the same issues.
Got it. Thank you. I want to pivot to Khyri and ask, how do you plan on staying socially connected? You're a student at an HBCU, which is all about the experience. And now everybody's doing distance learning. You guys are old enough to make your own decisions. So if you want to go out and be masked up and stay 6 feet apart, you have the agency to do that. But I'm curious, what are you looking forward to in this upcoming school year? Is it all bad, or is there something that is still exciting to you about this upcoming year?
Well, you know, I've really been like in contact with my friends this whole time. You know, we've been talking, you know, pretty often, you know, about how things are going and stuff and just catching up. But I know a lot of us are really at least hoping and looking forward to at least next semester, hoping that we'd possibly be able to go back then. But even, yeah, like when we hang out, we were maybe talking about maybe trying to get together during break or something and, you know, just like take all the precautions we can, like quarantine, wearing masks, all those. But yeah, we're definitely making sure we stay connected, but also at the same time, staying protected and really hoping that we can do like all we can, like I said, to get to a point where we can at least go back to somewhat normal and go back to campus and see each other.
As a scholar, what advice do you have for educators on how they should be navigating this?
Mm-hmm. Like a lot of the other people on the panel were saying, like, I really feel like they should listen to other people, like the students and the parents, and how they feel, because like if you have to go to school, like if I was still in high school, I wouldn't want to go to school. I don't think I would, but like I wouldn't feel comfortable, you know. And when you're getting like education, like if you can't feel comfortable or you don't feel like safe, or, you know, something's just off, like you're not going to learn very well, you'll get behind, and like it's just not going to be a very good experience. So I really think that it'd be really important to, you know, like they were saying, like listen to the voices of other people and take all the precautions from other experts and stuff, and really you know, do like all you can and not try to rush like straight into it.
And for Ayo, who is going to be homeschooling and has already been homeschooling, if parents decide they want to give this a shot, or at least explore it, where would you recommend that people get started in their journey to possibly starting homeschooling? Is it too late at this point?
No, it's not too late at all. You would register as a homeschool family with your school district, and the enrollment is very similar as it is to enrolling in another school, except for you'll get a letter in the mail that says, congratulations, you've been enrolled in homeschool. For African American homeschool parents, I suggest you check out the Liberated Minds Expo.com. It's a website, and that is an annual expo that's usually in person, but it's an annual expo for Black homeschoolers who are really interested in raising their children with a liberated mindset. And there is a hub of Black homeschoolers across the nation, and honestly across the world, where you can find lots of information on finding your curriculum and different perspectives to homeschooling and or unschooling, which is what our family does. And so I would really suggest liberatedmindsexpo.com. Connect directly with your school district around getting the paperwork in, even vaccinations, and, you know, all that paperwork is very much so the same. And then most important, in my opinion, is to build a relationship with your child. Homeschool will not be successful if you don't have a really secure relationship with your child. And so building that relationship is very much so a part of the unschooling process, and building yourself into the confidence of being your child's first teacher, and also building your child up to be able to see you as their primary educator. So build that relationship, repair any disruption in the connection that we know comes from the day-to-day life of stress. So those are a few of the things that I would suggest first.
Thank you. I muted myself. Angela, you just got the news that you are going to be going back in person to school. And as a social worker, as a staff person with the Brooklyn Center Elementary, where do you go from here? What are you anticipating is going to be next?
That's a great question, Brittany. So it's called Limited Campus Hybrid Model. So staff will be expected to report to the building while students are at home, learning at home. I have some questions about that for my district, for my school. I'm not clear yet. It's only been a day, but I'm not clear yet on the reasoning behind that. That feels a little unsettling to me, kind of a lot unsettling to me. I don't know what that's about. But if I can just take 1 second, I just really want to emphasize what other folks have said about the importance of voice, of student voice, of families bringing their voice. Bring it to your district, bring it to your school. Don't be afraid to say what you're thinking and what you're feeling, what you're going through and what you need. Because we're walking into unprecedented times. We've been in unprecedented times, right? We don't really know. We're all kind of figuring this out as we go. And there's so much to consider. Like, I don't want to underestimate the importance of mental health right now for everyone. And that might feel unfamiliar or just not okay for some of our families to say, hold on, school, hold on, teachers, administrators, whoever they're speaking to or they need to speak to, hold on, I need to pause for a second, right? Because you're throwing a lot at me, and education is important, and we don't want to fall further behind, right? And that is all valid. Education will be there. I just want to emphasize education will be there. I think that there will be opportunity to sort of like catch up, right? Like, hopefully. But we do have to tend to the mental health of our kiddos, of our young people and our families. And we have to make sure that we're listening for that. We have to make sure we're asking questions as educators. Really, really important, because as Khyri just explained, like if you're not feeling it, if you're not able to be there in whatever fashion, online, in person, students aren't going to be learning. They need an opportunity, like Mr. Walker said, they need to, like, let's reach out, let's speak to the humanity of our kids and our families first. Let's connect with them, let's reconnect with them, let's figure out how we're doing before we dive in. And I just want to really just empower families and our young people to use their voice, bring it to the table, demand that they be heard, and they say what they need.
Incredibly important. Thank you for naming that we've primarily focused on our physical well-being because COVID-19 is a virus, right? But also with a global pandemic, with an uprising, with being in unprecedented times and having disparities as it relates to technology, or just being in a transition. There are mental and emotional implications behind that are going to impact our scholars' ability to see information and to learn, willingness to engage, parents' energy level to support in their education, as well as just parents' apprehension even in sending their babies into a physical space. And all of that is valid. I want to pivot to Monshari, but really quick, Ayo, will you put the name of the homeschool resource in the chat? We've got somebody who wants to take a look at that. So Monshari, can you tell us, you're in your first week and you're with the little ones. Do you feel like in the past couple of days it's been successful so far? Are they keeping their masks on? Are they practicing social distancing? Are you feeling optimistic about this thing moving forward?
Yes. So it's been interesting. We spent last week doing a lot of training on our new COVID policies with our staff, getting all of our staff tested and getting all of our facilities ready. That was a huge undertaking. You know, we've 13 locations and setting out 6-foot markers everywhere and decreasing the materials in the classroom so that what's left behind is enough for teachers to instruct with, but things that can be cleaned easily and kept sanitized. But this week with children has been kind of the, you know, we're seeing some things I think that we could do better, but we're seeing a lot of things that are going really well. You know, someone mentioned earlier where the difference with daycare is that you have the ability to space children out a little bit more. There are fewer numbers of students in a classroom. And that has, I think, is what is making this go successfully. We're able to, with smaller numbers of kids coming into the building, be able to screen them all. So we're taking temps for every child every day. We're asking those questions of their parents for every child every day. And we're using our nurses to give some support to staff, you know, when they have questions about, you know, hey, one of my kids showed up with a little bit of a runny nose. Is this something that I need to be concerned about? But it's really, I think it's been really helpful to have those smaller numbers of students. And I just don't see how we would have been able to do this with our regular group sizes. You know, we typically have 17 preschoolers in a classroom. And, you know, I just can't imagine having to have done that and still get through screening and managing and monitoring hand washing and other things. But I'd say today and day 3, it's going pretty well.
Good, that's good to hear. And are your scholars taking the bus or are their parents dropping them off?
90% of our students take the bus. So we transport from every child's front door to the front door of our centers. And we have a screener who is riding the bus. So they're temping kids and they're going through the screening process before we even allow the child on the bus. And after screening, then they're sanitizing their hands with hand sanitizer before they get on the bus. So and we've got assigned seating, children spaced out 6 feet apart on the bus. So with smaller classroom sizes, smaller number of kids on the bus, and they're in pods. So they're with the same group of students every day riding into the school and the same staff every day when they get here. And so, you know, that's very, very helpful, very helpful. You know, I have to say also with what we did before we even opened was survey all of our parents to understand from our parents what their intentions were, what they would like to have seen happen, what parents were ready to come back, and which parents felt that, you know, I'm not there yet. And the parents that are sending their students are the ones who have expressed interest, and we felt the need to bring in our older students that will be going off to kindergarten and making that transition into a distance learning model for many of them, and our parents who are in childcare. So their parents have been really at a disadvantage to not have childcare during this time, and they needed to get back to work. So I think that also goes a long way with making this successful, having the buy-in from the parents that are there to do their part and to assist us in making, you know, keeping everyone healthy and safe, as well as our staff. We also surveyed staff as well.
Incredibly important. And I I really appreciate all the thoughtfulness that you all put into not just following guidelines from Department of Health, but making sure you're listening to the families and to the staff and adjusting accordingly. That's incredibly important. I want to give the final question to Michael Walker. This is coming from the chat, but the question was, how and what should we be advocating to protect and support our children, rather than being driven by what appears to be based on political framework versus their humanity?
I mean, that's the question. I'm supposed to be able to answer that big old question, huh?
No pressure, or
right?
however you want to close it. I trust you.
Oh man, I guess I would say trying to ask. Well, obviously we want to protect our babies, right? And when I look at protecting our babies, one thing I'm saying is that what is in the best interest of our students individually, but in this situation right now, we're also got to be thinking about the collective, right? This is something that we are all dealing with that impacts us also. Even every individual decision I make will have a ripple effect of impacting somebody else's family or community or whatever. And so we got to be mindful of that piece. And so I don't have a straight framework to answer that question, but it makes me go back to the thought process of, even as we're talking about schooling. And, one question that keeps coming up for people is like, how or who should we be focusing on the most at this time, right? And should we be focusing on staff or students or whatever? Right now, my mind is saying, what about those students who have been marginalized when we were in face-to-face learning? Right. So when we went to distance learning, there was a population of students, and we're going to just be very intentional and direct about this, Black and brown students who were not engaged in school already, right, during the face-to-face model. Then we went to distance learning. And so now that engagement just kind of got widened. And so we missed some opportunities to engage with our students face-to-face to be able to utilize those relationships so that distance learning or virtual learning could actually work. Right. So we have to be very intentional as we go back to school of saying, how do we those relationships? How do we regain that trust from the community? Because in some spaces, we have not had that trust because of our own doing within the school system. And so that's going to take a lot of work on our end to focus on that. And we have to be willing to go outside of our traditional norms. Again, this loyalty to legacy where everybody's going to come to us. We got to start reaching out to that community. We got to start making those phone contacts or sending letters home or being out in community spaces to promote what we are trying to accomplish, and also to promote that we're listening and want to get better at what we're doing. If we're not doing that, then it's going to be a difficult time as we transition back into school, whether it be virtual or in a hybrid model. But that's one of the things I think we have to answer and figure out. So I know I didn't answer the direct question, but I gave a response that I thought would be beneficial for folks.
Absolutely, and very well said. Thank you. We appreciate that. Adriene, before we close, can you tell people where they can get tested in the event that they're experiencing symptoms, or even if they're not, they can still just get tested if they feel like they've been exposed? Where is that?
Yeah. So North Point Health and Wellness continues to offer drive-in and in-person appointments. You do have to make an appointment to get tested, so call their number to make that appointment. Also, if you go to the Minnesota Department of Health website, they have a list of clinics that offer testing throughout the state. So no matter where you live in the state, you have somewhere a site that you can get tested at. I recommend you go there. Also, a lot of the health clinics are offering testing. So if you have a primary care clinic, call your clinic and see if they are offering testing and what you need to do to get tested there.
Absolutely. And the number to North Point to schedule your appointment to get tested for COVID-19 is 612-543-2500. Again, 612-543-2500. That is free, correct? And so it doesn't matter what your insurance is or any of that, if it's just you or if it's the whole family. So thank you to all of our panelists for your time and for sharing this information. I don't know if there's a more sensitive topic that we could possibly discussing than the health and the success of our children, right? There's nothing more important to us. And so we know that there needs to be a part 2 to this conversation. We know that this is not done. And so we have scheduled an additional virtual town hall, which will be next Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. It will be broadcasting live from the African American Facebook page, as well as to YouTube. We had some tech issues earlier today, but we'll get it figured out and we'll make sure that this video is accessible and everybody can watch it and share it with their networks. And before I wrap up, I do want to, of course, say thank you to the African American Leadership Forum for organizing this, and to their sponsors, the Minneapolis Foundation, North Point Health and Wellness, and Children's Minnesota, as well as our partners, which include North Point, Children's Minnesota, Insight News, the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder, and Minnesota Community Care. My name is Brittany L. Wright, representing Insight News, and it has been an absolute pleasure to share digital space with you all. Please continue to advocate for your scholars, for your children, your nieces, your nephews, as well as the educators who are also within the school system, and let's together to find the best possible outcome for all of us. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next Wednesday.